Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out. It's great to see a full house for this program. My name is Carson McCully. I'm the Assistant Manager of Adult Programs here at the museum. And tonight's lecture, The New Nordic Restaurant, Culinary Manifesto, and Architectural Concept, is part of our exhibition-related programs for New Nordic Cuisine, Aesthetics, and Place, which is our special exhibition. If you haven't seen it yet, please go and see it. We have about a month and a half before it closes, and it's remarkable. If you'd like to learn more about our upcoming programs, including more lectures like this, arts, crafts, cooking workshops, film screenings, etc., please visit our website at nordicmuseum.org/events and sign up for our newsletter. Tonight's speakers will be introduced by creative director and co-owner of JAS Design Build, Kim Clements. Kim's connection to the design build world started in architecture and design schools. She holds design and architecture degrees from North Carolina State and the University of Washington. In her role at JAS, founded in September of 1992, Kim is able to continue developing a passion for homes and how we live in them while exploring just how beauty and creativity can live alongside reality and functionality. Her mission as creative director is to excel beyond the ordinary and push the design build model to a truly unique place. Please join me in welcoming Kim Clements.
Thanks, Carson. I'll follow Carson and introduce our panelists this evening. Dorf. He's been in the Norwegian firm Snoetta's New York City office since 2007. Is that correct? He's director as well as climate design lead, senior architect. His background, he was at the GSD at Harvard and University of Virginia as an undergrad. Many of his projects, I'm sure folks in the room know, the National September 11th Memorial Pavilion. That's pretty amazing first project to jump on. The Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, and a project that will really inspire you all tonight and is integrally connected to the exhibit, which is Under, one of the few underwater restaurants in the world. Kai-Uwe Bergmann has been with the Danish firm BIG, the Bjarke Ingels Group, in their New York City office since 2006. He's a partner in the group, and he's working on projects globally. He does have quite a few connections to the Pacific Northwest. He was a student at the Pilchuck Glass School from 2000 to 2002, but I think we're finding more years than that. And he was a graduate student at UCLA and also an undergrad at University of Virginia, so we have quite a representation here. Projects also you will know quite well or have heard of. One of the more interesting ones is the East Side Resiliency Project, the Big U, that's going on right now, they're working on. The Smithsonian Master Plan, and for this evening's visuals, Noma 2.0, which is in Copenhagen, and it's probably one of the more well-known restaurants in the world. The current National Nordic exhibit that Carson introduced, New Nordic Cuisine, Aesthetics, and Place, really does try to explore the connections between gastronomy, design, history, culture, and architecture. Kind of a crazy thing to set out to do. This evening, through the lens of what is known as the New Nordic Manifesto, we're trying to explore where and how cuisine and architecture not only intersect but coexist to create a new relationship to what and how we eat. Modern food systems have been driven by global industry engines for a very long time just to seek efficiency and uniformity. 20 years ago, the Nordic Kitchen Manifesto was a group of chefs, politicians, food producers, foodies who got together and said, we need to change how we think about food. This took place in Copenhagen, and it really began to change everything about how we think about food and our connections to it. Aaron and Kai will be sharing several projects with you tonight, including the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, Under, the coastal maritime restaurant and a center, and Noma 2.0 Culinary Village, hopefully inspiring examples of the intersections of food, environment, stewardship, craft, architecture, and people. So I will turn it over to Aaron and Kai to share their work with you, and then we'll have a chance to ask them a few questions, and then you all will have a chance to ask some questions at the end.
That's good.
Aaron.
Thanks. It's good to be the warm-up act, and I'm sure Kai will move at a pace that will be absolutely mind-blowing. I'll try to ease you into it. In 2019, the restaurant Under opened to the sea and the world at large. Perched on the rugged coast of Lindesnes, it sits on the southernmost tip of Norway, and it's pushed out into the unique marine environment of the North Sea. The building's raw monolithic form was built on a barge, moored adjacent to its future location. It was then carefully lowered into the sea and fixed to the sea bottom using steel rods. The result is a structure that rests upon the rocky shoreline, partially submerged beneath the waves as part of the marine environment, both participant as much as observer. With half-meter thick concrete walls, Under is built to withstand the shock forces of the rugged sea edge conditions. The structural concept is simply a pipe, continuous for maximum strength below the water surface and then carved open above, creating entry and welcoming visitors. At its base, a large single panoramic acrylic window, 36 feet wide by 13 feet tall and 12 inches thick, connects visitors to the seabed, allowing them to experience the rhythms of the sea through tidal weather and seasonal change. Under's architecture, menu, and teaching mission intertwine to give visitors an experience that immerses and creates a complete sensory connection to the power of nature through light, sound, texture, smell, and flavors. Due to the minimal amounts of daylight below the sea and in keeping with the theme of the restaurant, outdoor and indoor lighting is allowed to float into the room only where it's needed. When it's raining outside, the light flickers within the restaurant. When the water is still, you can see the string of light lines traveling through the sea. And when the surf is heavy, the light inside the room churns along with it. Light, of course, also has a significant impact on the ocean's ecosystem, and together with marine biologists, the lighting design considered various solutions by first measuring the effect on local marine life. The lighting concept at Under extends beyond the interiors into the sea to measure the effects of lighting according to luminous emittance and spectral distribution below. The idea is to attract a variety of species that will be visible from the restaurant without harming the natural habitat. Under was designed and engineered carefully to nurture and mitigate damage to the underwater context. The surface of the concrete shell below the water was intentionally roughened for marine life to engage and attach. Over time, a mollusk community and its local ecosystem has begun to thrive, naturally cultivating a subaquatic camouflage, and it's become an artificial reef, cleaning the surrounding water and naturally attracting more marine life. The visitor's experience enacts a deep sea dive as you descend through 3 levels. From the entrance, guests enter the wardrobe area and continue down a floor to the champagne bar. This marks the transition between shoreline and the ocean. The passage from above to below is captured by a narrow acrylic slot that cuts vertically through each restaurant level. The color scheme follows the logic of different marine zones. The champagne bar is characterized by subtle colors of surrounding coastline and its shell, rock, and sand environment, while the dining room is submerged in darker blues and greens inspired by seabed, seaweed, and restless waves. The warmth of wood and textiles above transition to cooler steel and concrete below. The terrestrial and submarine worlds become intuitively linked. The restaurant also houses an interdisciplinary research team who study marine biology and fish behavior. The research helps create the best conditions for sea life to thrive over time, next to a restaurant that can comfortably seat about 100 guests. The food at Under is locally, and one might say immediately sourced, to show the world variety and otherworldly potential of the unique seafood available at Norway's southern coast and the Northern Sea. I grabbed these off of a food influencer, and they're totally outrageous. As a counterpoint, I'll introduce a project currently in construction in the North Dakota Badlands, the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, or as we'll call it today, OVER. The connection of the library with our topic has as much to do with the ingredients as it does with form. This is a brief reading of building and landscape as a menu that emerges directly from its local environment. In the spring of 2020, if you can place yourself back in that moment, a competition for this unexpected project arrived like the first shoot of grass, dormant from a hard winter. Amidst the fear and uncertainty in those early months of the pandemic, the hope that this project brought started a feeling of renewal in the office. After personal tragedy, TR, as he went by, discovered his identity in Medora, North Dakota, saying that he never would have become president had it not been for his time there. We began our work remotely, eventually a small group of us landing on site, camping in the Badlands to better understand the story of TR and the place. In this raw, eternal nature, we couldn't imagine a building, and no designed landscape could recreate it. The natural form of the library had to exist between these worlds, inspired by and at home with the rolling, timeless geology of the Badlands. At the site, 2 pebbles and a leaf led us to a discussion on the nature of place. When arranged together, they create space and terrain. Architecture and landscape merge into something that is neither and both. The building itself is a single form split into 2. One side is exhibitions and amenities. The other is events, education, and support spaces. Once split, they create a public passageway or a breezeway. The interior spaces are captured by a sloping grassland roof that passes over the library, anchoring it to the ground and to its context. We realized early on that Roosevelt's library is the landscape, expansive and ancient, yet individual and momentary. As with New Nordic Cuisine, this project is made from locally sourced materials wherever possible. Pursuing the Living Building Challenge's first full certification, material procurement is required to be within several proximities, with a maximum of 50% of all materials, minimum of 50% of all materials by cost required to be made within 1,000 kilometers of the site, which is a significant challenge due to the location. North Dakota is one of the least populated states in America, and few things are made nearby. So I'll go through a few materials like a menu. The most notable characteristic of the area is earth, left raw and exposed throughout the North Dakota Badlands. The land, never having been flattened by glacial ice, is steep, severe, and stark. Its arid, unvegetated slopes clearly revealing the strata of earth like an open book of geological history. The chapters in that book tell a story that spans eons. Ancient seas in limestone and clays, forests and swamps in the bands of coal, volcanic events in the ash, and our land use histories, both good and bad, layering down upon it all today. Experiments with the earth, testing for structural characteristics, scanning the landscape for color, texture, aggregates, helped us create a palette that doesn't copy but evokes the Badlands. The colors of the earth, rocks, and clay, but also the coal veins, plant life, and shadows, creates an experience that is not only about the soil, but very much captured within it. These materials form the backdrop of arrival inside the library. Rammed into forms, these walls are over 25 feet tall and 24 inches wide. Earthwall Builders was enlisted to help create these walls, but more interestingly, they don't build them themselves. They're a small team of experts that trains local builders, typically concrete tradesmen, in this ancient building technique. Without any similar walls in North Dakota, to get educated quickly, the team toured a number of earth walls in Wyoming and Colorado. The local tradesmen built several rounds of small and then larger mock-ups, and as their confidence grew, the library walls finally emerged from local soils on site. As experts now in this craft, the local team have already built multiple earth walls for regional clients that have either seen the mock-ups nearby or been lucky enough to get a tour on site. Though a bit more regional than local, the timber elements were critical in helping us source regionally yet also low carbon structure. From the forest of Penticton, not too far away in British Columbia, we worked with Mercer, originally Structure Craft, to harvest and fabricate mass timber elements to support the library's heavy grass roof. The timber roof structure, holding more than 36 inches total of soil and grasses combined, as well as large skylights and traversable roof paths, passes over the two wings of the library, becoming its defining element. To plant the roof and reseed the full site with native plants, the TR would have experienced when he arrived in 1884, the project had to push engagement with the land even further. Early in the design process, we realized that sourcing conservation plantings was going to be a challenge. Many plants were not commercially available, and no one was producing Badlands-specific genetic stock. The project initiated its own native plant project, pairing volunteer seed collectors and volunteer landowners in a multi-year effort. We've been collecting seeds for the library, most importantly, connecting people to the land and to one another. The project is partnered with an applied ecology team at RES in North Dakota and with North Dakota State University to propagate all new planting for the TRPL project, with the greater ambition of becoming a seed bank for future regional use. And then there's FAIA. In April 2021, as design efforts restarted after a phase of programming, a wildfire raced throughout the Roosevelt Library site and surrounding region. Like most of the continent's grasslands, elimination of indigenous fire regimes and shifts in grazing from bison to cattle had left fuel loads to accumulate for well over a century. Before being quenched, the fire burned a total of 10,000 acres, including almost the entirety of the 93-acre site of the library. The fire was like a reset to the clock of the land, removing woody plants like this Juniperus horizontalis, which had been shifting the bluff away from grassland over time. Just months later, the site was already green with growth, lush with grassland plants already adapted to the millennia of fire. The wildfire was a vivid reminder of urgency for better land management practices. Controlled burns to maintain a healthy, restored grassland will be utilized as part of the land management practices at the library, making fire a feature of the landscape and minimizing future risks. As a building material, we are experimenting with using the ash from remnants of the wildfire as pigment in the rammed earth hearth at the library's fireplace, to enshrine the power of the story of this element within the interior experience. And finally, we come back to food. The library's cafe will be run by a celebrated indigenous chef from the White Earth Reservation, known for her Native American cuisine with a focus on foraging local ingredients, meats, and ancestral food traditions to create meals that foster community and healing. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. That was amazing. Sorry, as was alluded to in the introductions, I really feel a deep, deep connection to the Pacific Northwest. And it didn't start here. It actually started in a glass school in Sweden where I learned and was trained to blow glass. And this was in Costa Boda. And while there, I happened upon a magazine, the National Geographic, that had a special issue about glass. Within the pages of that magazine, there was a gentleman by the name of Dale Chihuly that was stated as being sort of the maker and creator of an entire movement here in the Pacific Northwest and Seattle specifically. So wanting to keep blowing glass and also train myself as an architect in the use of glass, I popped over. And I happened to work in Dale's studio for about 3 years. And it was really sort of, I think, the place that made such a kind of implanted a seed in myself about the importance of materials, the importance of craftsmen and glassblowers, and how people work together. And the best place to learn this is actually Pilchuck Glass School, which was also founded by Dale and the Haubergs. And this is an image of the catalog from 2002 with one of the projects I worked on with Anna Trucha and Paul Marioni, where we just basically took ice, and that was the building material. And we built a sculpture that lasted for about 6 or 7 hours. But it was this kind of freedom to think, freedom to mold and to investigate different shapes. Then going on really huge global kind of installations in Venice, also in Jerusalem, and here in Iceland, that allowed me to think about glass as a material in many, many different settings. It was then that I decided to actually leave Seattle and to go to Europe to explore how I could now bring those different materials together. And at the Biennale of Architecture, I met Bjarke Ingels right behind me here on your left. And we've been together now for 20 years, really designing and trying to find ways to, at very different scales, bring a kind of design aesthetic and sort of Scandinavian values to a lot of projects. Here's the Smithsonian Master Plan, where it was for the first time, all of the Smithsonian museums on the malls have all been built as sort of individual silos with individual budgets, and there was never really truly a master plan to think about how to link all of these different institutions together and give them purpose. Or remapping the Brooklyn Bridge, which at the time that it was built 140 years ago was actually, had light rail and was moving circa 400,000 people across it on a daily basis. And now we're looking more at like 180,000 people via cars. So there was more movement, more activity in a previous life of the bridge than there is today. And so it's constantly thinking about where and how our planet, our cities, our geographies are used, in some cases abused, and how we can sort of start to think about bringing a design quality to these. This is in Bhutan, where a dam, a hydroelectrical dam, can actually also become a pilgrimage up and down, just like an Escher stair, that takes you to an actual Buddhist temple. It can be a celebration or a gateway, in this case an airport, that takes the sort of Bhutanese carving to almost an industrial scale. And how one takes something that would be carved by hand and also thinking about bringing in the ability to scale and bring that quality to larger buildings. So that is the sort of big universe and the different types of projects that I'm involved in. To bring this kind of Scandinavian or big approach to design to then being called by René Redzepi, the chef of Noma, where he had a very, very celebrated and successful restaurant named Noma. And it was mentioned previously that the Nordic sort of or Nordic kind of food was actually a movement of going back to the roots. And one thing to keep in mind, there was a movement in film called Dogma 95 that was predates it about by 5 to 6 years, where it too, with Tom Vinterberg and Lars von Trier, they were trying to find what is the essence of filmmaking. And just as in film, food became this idea of finding kind of an identity. Here in the first edition of Noma, it was actually in a warehouse that was previously where the goods of Greenland and the Faroe Islands and Iceland were actually brought to Copenhagen Harbor and stored. Within that warehouse then became the home of the first edition of Noma. And it was very, very cozy. I had the chance to eat there many times. And it was something that really brought food back down to the essentials, to the seasons. And I'm going to just show you a few plates from the different seasons of seafood or vegetables, roots, and venison. When he came to us, it was a request to actually think about a Noma 2.0. What is the next sort of vision of this? And if you can see here, the location of Noma 1 was right in the harbor. Noma 2 sort of moved a little bit on the fringe, on the old sort of wall, protective wall, in an area that many people in Copenhagen lovingly call Christiania. And it was in this kind of old army depot that it was a building that had sort of been disused and run over, graffitied, and was really just an empty kind of space that he saw a lot of potential in. And so it was really to think about the reuse and the retransformation of that. And then to not only think about how one could reuse, and in many ways, the sort of back-of-house of the restaurant became what was reused, and then all of the front of house, what people would actually experience in coming in and dining there, became a village where each individual space served a singular function, and they were arranged around the hearth or the kitchen. And so that village is what you experience when you actually go to eat there. Then off to the side, there are 3 greenhouses that are also there to grow many of the things that you actually also enjoy. That village we expressed through materiality, so that each building celebrates wood, brick, earth, steel, glass, and you get a real feel for the elements of buildings, just as you begin to also appreciate the elements of what you're dining. This is the entry sequence. You pass through a garden by the Dutch landscape architect, Piet. You come to the main entrance, and the main entrance is a sort of glorified closet where you enter and then you take off your coats or what you bring, and that is placed into your closet. And very quickly, it is a kind of series of spaces that domesticate you. So you see the firewood that's piled up in the corner. You see things that are just as you would in someone's home that you're being invited into. And then light is actually what separates one space from another. You pass through a hearth to a waiting area where you sit and wait to be seated in the main dining area. You can look out over the wetlands and you can hear a lot of the birds and the wind outside. You pass from that waiting area through the kitchen and under the sort of light that separates the different spaces. And as you pass through the kitchen meaningfully to actually also connect with the chefs, you then pass into the actual dining area. Here, you're seated and attended to. Going back to the kitchen, you can see that it's actually burnt wood, which is, of course, a way to preserve wood in old Viking kind of vernacular. And this is where the chefs are preparing the different plates. Off to the side, tucked away also from the kitchen, the main hearth, is a small room that allows for larger groups to dine, but not anything too large. So everything is really sized for a very intimate experience. And this is then also tended to by the same kitchen, with detailing here that you can see bringing in the air. There are different areas for certain fermenting, barbecuing, and everything, again, is always communicated through material and action. You have certain prep kitchens. You have this also where the Noma folks are eating themselves. And artwork is integrated throughout. It's really another part of the dining experience. So we're just going to basically leave. We've just had an incredible meal, and we're going to slowly depart. Say goodbye, and thank you.
Wow, I feel like my work here is done. You guys covered most of the things I wanted to bring up. The interesting thing about the new kitchen manifesto, as I was doing some research, was just this notion of the importance of an integrated, innovative framework of values to sort of guide the way food was presented in our lives. And it, at its essence, it seems that what they were, every point of the manifesto seemed to come back to was that it needed to be reflective of place and its resources. And so I am curious, Nordic design and culture have been very important in the world for a long time, but in the last 20 years, it seems like the depth and influence of that Nordic culture in other areas of design have become, I think it's very prominent. I think it's very influential. So I have a couple of questions about just how do you get into the layer of design that gets you to the essence of what chefs and food producers and diners, what you find it will influence and inspire them, and how did you get there with the chefs and the makers? Like, how did you build the program, not just from a square footage and these rooms and this need, but there's richness and depth here. How did you get there when beginning work with the clients?
Me first?
Go for it.
Sure. Under was pretty interesting because I think that, and maybe this is the case for all really like high-end conceptual restaurants. The chef, I think, they think spatially naturally, and certainly for any restaurants that adhere to the New Nordic philosophy, they're thinking about taking things from different parts of the local environment. So whether it's from the leafy parts of the environment, the coastal parts of the environment, the submarine parts of the environment, and so as designers, that to us triggers an idea of creating spatial awareness on the inside of a project and the outside of a project that can kind of say the same thing. So spaces that are more attuned to like the sand, spaces that are more attuned to the woody parts that are right by the building, and then ultimately spaces that are below the water. And so I think it creates a feedback loop. I think there are, when chefs are thinking about the regional sources as kind of these zonal spaces that they're drawing from, and we're working with them to create spatial zones within a project that create a feedback loop. I think the chefs also start to construct their work spatially on the plate in a way that thinks about the heavy things on the bottom, this sort of like protective layers on top, how you dissect them. And I think that kind of feedback loop is super interesting, and I think is a really amazing part of doing this kind of work.
Yeah, I would also agree that there's, in the case of René and what he has created, it is a level of wanting to be authentic, both to the food source and to the tastes, so that everything is sort of accentuated. And I think that that's in a little way what we try to do with the spaces and the materials that we choose is we don't try to apply a lot of colors or apply a lot of layers to a material. We would rather show the raw material and have the rawness interplay and work with what it is against. And so that authenticity, I think, is something that is very unique to Scandinavian and Nordic design. There isn't the sort of decorative and the sort of extra.
Kind of thematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I take it also back to the first time I ate at Noma. I had one of those experiences where it was dessert. And so you've already had quite a lot of courses. But the dessert suddenly made you, or at least me, sit in my grandmother's kitchen having a dessert which was old bread that had hardened. And so she put a little beer into it to soften it up. And it's like beer bread. And I don't know how many of you guys have had this ølbrød, but ølbrød is maybe the most basic kind of food source. It should be a food group. And being able to transport you from that restaurant to your grandmother's kitchen and back again is a phenomenal experience. And I think if you can also do that spatially, architecturally, and make people feel in certain instances that they have been transported to a different place or a memory, that's also, I think, shared between the design and the making of the food.
Alchemy. One of the aspects of the exhibition that, if any of you haven't seen it, it is really worth seeing. It's worth spending some time. They're sort of letting you fill in the gaps. They talk about the aesthetic all starts with the landscape. I think the projects you've shown sort of express that, I think reinforce that idea. I think it's interesting how both of your projects that you've worked at, all three projects, but particularly Under and Noma 2.0, you found ways to amplify the spirit of place through the use of materials, as you just described. I wonder if and that it's more of a collaboration with the landscape instead of being a building that's put onto the landscape. I think for just most people thinking about buildings, that's a sort of unique way to consider the presence of the landscape. I did wonder that in both of your projects you've shared, they have honesty and depth of meaning. Did landscape present itself as an immediate collaborator in your design narrative, or did it unfold more slowly as the project developed? Sort of, was it like love at first sight, or was it a little bit of a slow growth to understand the depth of the landscape that you were working in?
I'll start. So I don't know if you remember in the first Noma, there was some landscape, kind of triangular gardens around the warehouse. That was out of necessity because so many people were putting their faces onto the windows and gawking while people were eating that they said, oops, we need some distance. Yeah. So they imported Icelandic lava to create kind of a shield. And then they also actually grew things there. They had bees that were pollinating there. And again, they really took advantage of suddenly having that as a resource, a garden. Transport now to Noma 2.0, and the landscape was viewed as literally the kitchen or the cupboard, because they grow things in the water, they grow things in the back of the restaurant. It's really, if you were to draw a site map, It's not what we would consider the plot of land. It is really about just a far more expansive approach. And I think that's also really interesting is, what do you define as your, what you resource from? Resource as a word is also truly interesting in terms of just source, and then the reuse of it or doing something with that source. And that's how they think about landscape, I believe.
Well, I mean, it's probably not it's an open secret that Snøhetta is fairly kind of driven and inspired by landscape. I think we have a challenging and challenged relationship with the horizon and trying to understand how to kind of tip things, make relationships between above and below, between the terrestrial world and the underwater world, kind of one experience. And most of our work probably is in its best light when those worlds are really blurry. I mean, Under was an opportunity, not the first opportunity, but a big opportunity to really sort of build something in the water that allowed you to experience water in a way that wasn't like an observer, but you were actually, suddenly in a new environment, an alien environment. And I think, that opportunity is rare. We've done other projects that are in the water, but nothing that was sort of a part of the water in the same way. But I think it's landscape for us is usually a starting point. It's kind of our like Y chromosome. It's other architectural projects are sort of like double down on architecture, and we always try to have a balanced relationship as much as possible. And so I don't know. I think Under to me is a pretty amazing opportunity that just sort of met the right folks to actually try to put that together at the same time.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. We're on the subject of ingredients, and in architecture, that's materials as well. It's clear that on these projects, the idea of the closed loop, whether it's the stones and experimenting with how you build walls out of site-specific materials or burnt wood, or I wonder if you could speak to how any of these materials and ingredients that you used, did any of them contribute to your projects in a sort of unexpected way to you? Like, did you discover in the course of this work or other projects that you work on? Because it seems to be a thread that runs through many of the projects of Big or Snøhetta. I'm just curious if the ingredients or the materials presented discoveries that you really didn't expect.
Me this time?
Sure.
Well, I mean, I think there's a certain amount that you kind of anticipate going in with most materials. I mean, we all use a relatively, we all start with a palette that's fairly kind of predictable and normal, steel and concrete and glass. I think what you do to them can create, unpredictability or theories that don't always turn out to be right or wrong. I think sort of scarring the concrete at the sort of the water level, below the water level at Under, was a kind of like late light bulb that went off to say, how are we gonna create an environment that actually allows inhabitants to become a part of the building. I think that was that was kind of a fun discovery. I think there's other stuff that's sometimes related to the material, sometimes it's related to the process. I can think of like the rammed earth walls. As we went through the process of building them, we had to kind of shift our source location because we were looking for soils that could maintain structural capacity, which is not easy. to do, especially in a place like North Dakota. And then even like the sort of thickness of the walls changed as we got laid into construction, just based on the fact that you couldn't fit a person into the formwork. Even though the walls would have been fine as they were, the earth walls would have been okay. And the people in North Dakota are not small people. And that actually started to change the elements of the design because, as they were mocking it up, we had an 18-inch wall and we couldn't get those dudes in the formwork at all.
Yeah.
They were going in sort of sideways and just not able to go all the way to the bottom. So, I think all of those things, the materials, the processes, the light bulbs.
It sounds a bit like cooking, it's like things happen and it's not what happens, it's what you do about it. And sometimes those become sort of pivotal moments in the work. It's interesting to me too, I'm just looking at your slides. I started, I think we sometimes immediately go to the most tangible, tactile things as ingredient and material, but I would say in all of this work tonight, fire, light, weight, air, they're all ingredients. They're not just the resultants of the actual form itself. It's like you've somehow figured out how to use and harness those as materials in the architecture. And I think that may be what leads you to have those kind of out of time and place experiences, like you're going to your grandmother's kitchen and coming back, I think.
I would also make a plug here for history and really understanding vernacular construction. Because one of the things that we were asked by Renee to really look into was the way that they build on the Faroe Islands. And there, it really is still a very sort of Viking tradition of placing as much of the house or home in a way in the ground so that that's the thermally insulated, it all has sort of reasons. And he wanted to take advantage of that, half of the restaurant was kind of against the soil. And he wanted to feel like you were in the earth when you were in that part. And he wanted you to feel like you were towards the light. And that's why we opened all of the spaces in between the buildings to daylight. Mm-hmm. And you asked about, what did you discover? And I think it was that the light interplay between the different materials was actually extremely joyful. And it's like what people also kind of perceive when they walk in. Mm-hmm. So I think it's construction techniques and really looking at and learning from the history around you. Mm-hmm. And here in the Northwest, that could be what the indigenous folks have done. It's the way that you build these long houses and mm-hmm. the planks and the way that the joints are and the procession, the kind of proscenium and all of the ways that you actually have of building here mm-hmm. That you could start to bring in a kind of contemporary interpretations of.
Thank you for leading to the final question. I think the question I want to ask is what does the new Nordic, as it's called, I think it's funny that it's called new, what does it have to teach architects and designers about the power of place and about the value of collaboration and cross-pollination? I think that's one of the other observations I had about this work as I was reading, was that there were so many, sometimes it was a collaboration between Dutch weavers and furniture makers to make the chairs for Under, or I even read, and you'll have to tell me whether this is true or not, that all the uniforms of the staff at Under are made from recycled fishing nets. So, there's these sort of interesting, joyful, delightful interplays, ceramicists, like the impact that this that these restaurants and this manifesto have had, I would think, on the world of ceramics alone, it's very important. I'm just curious, what does it have to teach us, either as designers, architects, dwellers, people who live in places with a capital P?
I think what we can learn is where things come from. When you're presented the venison kind of menu, and you suddenly hold an antler as your knife, and you're asked to now cut into the meat, it is a different type of experience of cutting into the meat because you're holding an antler as opposed to just silverware. And I think if we can architecturally or think about this in our daily lives of, understanding where things come from and how we use them, that sort of idea of resource and source, if we can start to build a better connection, then I think that's kind of like what the cuisine is teaching us. With the ceramics, it's earth. So you're like literally taking dirt and you're forming it and heating it, and then you have a plate. And all of these things are actually very ritualistic, and that's perhaps what I take away.
I think even that building relationships, I believe it might be Credo, one of the restaurants in Norway, where they have a whole herd of dairy cows that produce the milk that they then in the kitchen do cheeses and all kinds of things. And in the restaurant itself, just like, if you go to Sardi's, there's portraits, on the wall. All the portraits on the wall are of the whole herd of dairy cows, and their names are in brass plaques underneath. And it's really charming, and it's like as a way to say, to honor, to know, to build relationships to what we eat, and the way you can utilize architecture and space to communicate or to give a platform for that communication. What do you think?
It makes me think of a couple things. One are the things that we've learned, and the others that are the things that we haven't learned yet. So in terms of what we've learned or what we're learning, I think that saying, in food culture, like what grows together goes together, I think works for architecture too. If you use the native wood in a space that also, harvests native stone, the light from that space, it reacts with those materials in such a way that I think it's inherently intuitive to the people that live there that this is local, this is home, and I think it creates an experience for people that are visiting that's unique. And I walked through the exhibit before this, and I was watching the video of the butchery that goes on.
Oh, yeah.
And vegans, you can cover your ears right now, but the way that they were sort of taking the animal apart, I think it was a reindeer, was so efficient, and the meat kind of came off all the bone. There was nothing left. And I think about the things that we can't do well yet in architecture. Like, we can't take a building apart very well yet. If you try to separate rebar from concrete, it's a mess. And how can we learn things that we know from the world of living as humans and evolving over thousands of years, the things that we've already taught ourselves? How can we apply those things to architecture in a way that we haven't yet? What can we learn, and what can we extract? So I think we're not there on some things, but maybe we could find a way.
Thank you, guys. We're at the point. It went faster than I thought, so that was good. We're at the point of opening this up to questions from the audience. I think Carson has a microphone, and I'll put on my glasses so I can see people. Over here, Carson.
Hi, Hi. So I was really moved as someone who grew up very close to the land with a strong sense of place by the projects you showed today are really sensitive to the intelligence of nature, which I think is really moving. It really brings this like natural biological sensibilities into not only the design, but also the experiences of these places through the materials and circulation and the immersion into the landscape. I guess like what I would like to know is what do you think the role of projects like that are so sensitive to natural intelligence in a world that is increasingly artificially intelligent?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, I would say that it's going to become increasingly important to have spaces that ground you and educate you in terms of, you know, the body to space and the body to the feel of different materials to how those spaces are used. So I think that within a screened life where you're surrounded by screens and interacting with screens, those experiences will carry more and more weight. So I think that, you know, there will always, I think, as a human, be a natural desire to experience. And we need to ensure that we don't lose hold or grasp of that ability of the connection to nature or the connection to experience. So it does become very, very important. And to Aaron's point of just the horizon of over and under, you know, that's almost essentially what shelter means. You're sheltering yourself in an over and under kind of way. So it's very elemental to take it down to that kind of basic sense.
I think it's easier to know what's real if you've experienced real, if you've had some touch with it. You know, you talk about the materials that are not only familiar, but your example of materials from a particular place behaving in a particular way. And if people have experience with that, we're going to have a much better chance, perhaps, of knowing what's real and what isn't real, and knowing the values of both.
Yeah, I'll use another local example. Like a lot of people think of Pike Place Market as, you know, where you go to maybe see food and see seafood. But I have to say the experience that I first had here when I moved was Uwajimaya?
Uwajimaya,
Yeah, Uwajimaya. That was a food experience because you went in there and it was the first time I'd ever been presented with a geoduck. And I didn't know what it was or what it did or how to eat it. And so, you know, that to me was discovery. Mm-hmm. And that was the most incredible setting for that all to happen. And so there are these places where you can have that kind of discovery and experience still in a very, you know, it's not like being on a ship or being on a shore and collecting geoducks, but it's still educating the public about its natural environment.
I think hyper-localism is, I mean, probably, you know, it goes without saying, but it's kind of an antidote to all the forces that, you know, all the global forces that kind of created contemporary society. AI is like a step beyond that. I almost kind of can't wrap my mind around it to answer that part of the question, but I think hyper-localism is really good at least a couple things. One is making connections between things that naturally inhabit the same place. So whether that's food or materials, I think that's of value. And you know, all globalism does is fragment our lives, but it also creates uniformity. And I think the other thing that hyperlocalism does that's really special is that you know, it creates uniqueness by its locality, right? It takes culture or terrain or anything you can imagine, and it distills it into a moment. And so you can't have a cookie cutter building that works under those principles. So I mean, to me, it's sort of like how you heal all of the injuries that we all sort of carry with us, just as a result of being alive today.
Oh, good. You're on it.
Yes, for the Under restaurant, was the solution that it ended up underwater part of a ongoing design process, that was kind of an aha moment later in the game? Or did that design process begin with that idea as a sort of point of departure?
It didn't come late. The design of that place was really intricately connected to, like an owner that was interested in creating an experience like that. So, I think, how to do that was really the design discovery rather than would we do it. I think, the aha moment was really, having the thought that, we should have an underwater restaurant. Wouldn't this be an amazing experience? Which it is. So, I think, we would love to take credit for things like that as designers. But, our clients and our owners have great ideas too. And so, I mean, whether it's the brief that comes to you in the beginning or whether it's something that happens together in a moment of discovery, I think that, for both better and worse on different projects, owners and clients often are really incredibly, valuable part of the design process. Ideas come from them, they come from us. We get all the credit sometimes. But I think it's, we just recognize it as an incredibly special opportunity. When somebody comes to you with something like that, immediately your mind starts spinning like, well, how do you do that? Where do you build this thing? Do you build it on site or off site? Do you have to, how do you create the foundations for this? So I think the discoveries were not the big thing. They were all the sort of small things that made the big thing possible.
Is that after you pinch yourself?
Yeah.
I'm going to skip that. I think I can project. Listening to you describe the TR library, I kept having images of Paulo Solari and Arcasante in the Arizona desert. And he built from all of the materials. He didn't have a choice. He also didn't have a computer. I'm curious, within your evolution in the series of architects, did you think about that at all? Did that cross your mind as you were working on it?
Specifically Solari?
Well, or on something, the organic shape, floating concrete, even with the
Not directly, but I would say that one of the big inspirations for that project, it started with Native American earth lodges, and so in that part of the world, in that part of the country, these are extremely thick, earth huts that have a very elaborate yet simple way that they're laid out on the inside to let smoke go out. And so, as we're looking at local contexts, there's the materials. As Kai said, there's, the vernacular. And so, a lot of, our projects, that project in particular, kind of comes from the synthesis of those things. And yes, Solari has done amazing things with them. I've been to Arcasante. I almost got stung by a scorpion there. It's super cool. But it wasn't particularly that place. Most of the Southwest is, has this kind of building technique as kind of endemic. You don't see it far enough away from the Southwest, unfortunately. You do have to have a pretty arid climate to use earth walls, for instance, or earth roofs sometimes. So I think, to me, I think looking farther backwards rather than just kind of early modernism is more interesting and definitely more relevant for that project.
We probably have time for one or two more questions. I think there was.
And of course, the original Noma didn't start out as a restaurant. It started out as a warehouse, as you indicated. It's probably something else now since Noma left. And how do you think about how buildings and places learn and change? And in terms of materials, in terms of, just natural systems, and in terms of program and function.
Yeah, there's a great example within the Noma 2.0. I mean, we all globally experienced the pandemic 6 years ago, and the food industry probably was hit, the hardest, and the hospitality industry. So there was no movement, and people were asked not to dine in small spaces. And so just like so many other places, Noma 2.0 completely closed down. And then, you could be very sort of sad and, worry. But instead, they looked at that as, well, what can we do? And then they looked at their landscape, the openness, and there was nothing that prevented them from using their landscape. So they opened a burger bar. And they basically, Renee said, we're going to make the world's best burger, and it's going to be $6. And we're going to have the best wines that kind of complement the burgers. And so he went on a quest with the chef team to create the most incredible outdoor, and people were just going there and having campfires and sitting around and eating the most incredible grass-fed burgers. And then that turned into an actual chain now called Popple. And I think to your question about buildings and how we reprogram them or rethink them, I think that's a great example of adversity, a challenge. And again, the human has an incredible ability to adapt and to think. And that's what we should be doing any time that there's a lapse or, an openness, that we actually use that time to think creatively about the reuse and the functioning of something. I think just, again, thinking negatively or whining or just, being bummed is just that we don't have time for that.
In a strange coincidence, we actually renovated the restaurant afterwards, after Noma left. So there's a restaurant called Bar.
Yes,
And,
exactly.
So,
a great Wiener Schnitzel, actually.
Yeah. So we came in afterwards, and actually it's one of the small little projects that's in the exhibit there.
The original Noma. You're talking about the
It's in the original Noma space.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
Was there one more? There's one more question. I think that's what we have time for.
Hello, this was a great presentation. Thank you for your time. You discussed how these culinary projects engage with nature and choreograph the visitor's experience, whether it's the water reflections or creating intimate spaces that may feel nostalgic. Could you speak to how the architecture has influenced the chef's process, whether the materiality or relationship to the landscape has impacted how they practice their craft?
I feel like you have to ask them. I don't know if we can speak on their behalf. My hope is that our spaces have also impacted or influenced them. I have a dream, which is we throw Friday bars like once or twice a month. And the Noma folks do too. And I always thought it would be amazing if we just threw a Friday bar together and have the architects meet the chefs and maybe find some commingling and creating sort of future families of architects that eat well and chefs live in cool places. It's never come to be, but maybe at a future Friday bar where we're all together, we can ask them how they kind of changed or were influenced by.
That takes time,
Yeah.
It may be happening.
Yes. Right now, Snowhetta just moved in across the street from our office in Dumbo, Brooklyn. And we also are about to throw a Friday bar.
Oh.
But that's just architects meeting other architects. So that's not as good.
In about 10, 12 years, there'll be some Snowhetta
Yes.
children.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I hope you guys can just join me in thanking these guys. I think this has been really great.